So good morning everyone and welcome to our next session on Dairy Tech. My name's Di Wastonage, I'm Vice Chair of RIBDF and I'll be leading you through our next session entitled TB, Identifying the Risks, Protecting Your Business from the Impact of a Breakdown. So today's session is sponsored by the TB Advisory Service, so thank you very much for that. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Sarah Tomlinson, well-known vet, leading expert on TB, someone I've heard many times before and I can keep listening to non-stop, so that's lovely. And it's really because she's a lady that understands the science, but also she understands that reality on farm, that emotional impact and of this really devastating insidious disease that is really affecting our livestock sectors. No silver bullet, Sarah, is there? But eradicating this infectious disease today, we're going to discuss some really practical ways that perhaps we can work on farm and try and help ourselves. Before we start, then a little bit of housekeeping. If you can keep your videos on off and your mute buttons on. We're active on Twitter on #DairyTech, so do join us there too. And what we're going to do, Sarah's going to chat for about 30 to 40 minutes and then we'll open it up to a discussion. So please do write your questions in the chat box on the side and they'll get fed through to me and I'll ask Sarah at the end. We should get lots of interesting questions on this because it is some really difficult issues that affects a lot of us. So Sarah, welcome. Lovely to see you on our virtual platform. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. You can hear me okay? That's the main thing. Super. So yeah, thank you very much. I seem to have spent the last sort of I am a farm vet from Derbyshire. So like Di said, hopefully I understand the practicalities of TB. I definitely understand the emotional impact of TB. I've worked in Derbyshire for 20 years and they, you know, my clients and my friends, I've known them for such a long time. Can I control the slides is the question. Just hopefully. So, right, hopefully I can control the slides now. Yes, so that's me. So when I talk to farmers, I think a lot of farmers get talked at by a lot of advisors that maybe do sit in their ivory tower. I really don't. I am a farm vet. I do sheep work, I do dairy work, I do Caesars, and I am giving this advice every day. So I hope that it really does feel practical and useful. And like I say, this is everything I say is things that I've seen and done on farm. But TB is a really tricky disease to control, and I got involved in TB eradication when the government in 2013-14 announced their 25-year strategy. And at the time, quite a lot of people went, oh, blimmin' heck, 25 years. But it will take 25 years, if not longer. And actually, this was the first time in my career that the government had actually announced a strategy. When I graduated in 2001, we had 4 yearly testing parishes next to breakdown parishes, and they didn't feel to be joined up thinking. Whereas now we do have this very specific strategy, and it is a fluid strategy and an organic strategy, and things will change. We've got a consultation that came out last week to look at changes moving forwards again. I also, 4 years ago, got appointed to a government advisory group called the TB Eradication and Advisory Group for England, and my knowledge of TB kind of went through the roof. And what I did learn was a lot about the politics around TB, and again I acknowledge that, but for today I would kind of quite like to park that out the room, because we can all talk about what should have happened 20 years ago and we can all talk about what should be happening, but we need to deal with what we've got to deal with now and today. All the policies to do with TB are based on science and evidence, and sometimes it doesn't feel like that, so I am going to sort of talk a little bit about some of that today. TB is political. I'm in Derbyshire. Some of you may know what happened to Derbyshire last year. That was politics, and you know, we dealt with it and we moved on. So I'm not skirting around that issue. I do know TB is political, but that shouldn't stop us as an industry playing our part, because we need to help the government eradicate this disease. Part of the 25-year strategy was to split the country into the edge area, the low risk area, which is the green, which is in the northern counties, eastern counties, the high risk area, which is the blue part of England, and then you've got the edge counties, which are in the middle, the orange areas. The hatched areas in the orange part are where they used to be part of the high risk area and are now on 6 monthly TB testing. Wales also was split into different areas, so they have their low risk, their intermediate areas and their high risk areas, and each area has very different policies, and this to me again was key for this 25-year strategy. Where we don't have TB, we don't need to go regularly looking for it. Where we do have TB, we need to be testing regularly. So to me, this made sense. The other thing I would like to say today is actually TB is getting better. And again, this is the first time in my 25-year career that we are seeing TB not just plateauing, but starting to decrease in incidence. And the kind of key bits on this slide are all of these are negative numbers. So the high risk area, the edge area and the low risk area of England year on year are going down. And the same is happening in Wales, except for sort of the intermediate area in the north has gone up a little bit. Scotland, you've kind of got to ignore, has gone up, but it's only gone up by 3 breakdowns. So when you're dealing with smaller numbers, obviously the percentages look different. So actually TB across England and the majority of Wales is getting better. So part of this 25-year strategy is working. You know, we've only been at it for 5-6 years, but we are seeing a response to what we're doing. These are showing incidents. So this is these are the herds that go down with TB for the first time. These are new breakdowns. And I think you can agree, Scotland obviously flatlining across the bottom has been pretty low the whole time. Wales, the purple line, has been decreasing sort of since March 2012. England started to plateau around 2011, but I'd like to think that is a downward trend is starting. This is England, and again, England as a whole is very different. So the high risk area, you can definitely see that plateauing sort of around 2011, and I think that is definitely a decline that's starting. The low risk area, again, very similar to Scotland, does have incidents of new TB breakdowns, but generally it's very low levels. The worrying part is that edge area that is on the rise, although the last couple of years we are seeing a slight decline. So, and Wales again, the lower area is pretty flat, starting to rise. The high risk areas, we've got that definite decline, but we just have this slight rise in this intermediate north area, which is a little bit worrying. This picture is kind of a reference, so I presume, are we sharing the slides to people if they want them? This just highlights really how complicated TB policy is. And this is why, if you're a farmer in Devon and you talk to a farmer in North Yorkshire, your policies will not be the same. And that's because of what I've explained, is that it's all to do with risk. So in the low risk area, the majority of herds are on 4-yearly testing. A lot of people say, why aren't they all on annual testing? If you go looking for disease where we don't have disease, you will get false positives and you will find it. The high risk herds in the low risk area are on annual testing. So where they have got movements going into them, or they're rearing heifers or bull hiring, those sort of herds are on annual testing. So the government do recognise there are higher risk herds. But yeah, this is kind of just to show that everywhere has slaughterhouse surveillance, everywhere has surveillance skin testing, but there's different policies as to the use of gamma testing and obviously badger control. So that's kind of the background to TB. I have got positive news. The TB stats are coming down. We've still got a long way to go. TB is political, but we're going to park that out of the room now, and we're going to think about TB as an infectious disease. And I think as a dairy industry, we are really good at looking at infectious disease, we investigate it, we test for it, we plan for it, we put in vaccination programs, and we're trying desperately to eradicate it. We've got BVD controls at the moment, we've got free funding, there's BVD Free England that's been established for quite a while. We've got the Johne's Action group that's been going for a while. We've now got most, if not all, dairy farms have to do some Johne's screening. And as a farm vet, I get asked all the time, you know, I've got a lameness problem, I've got an abortion problem, what tests do we do? How can I eradicate it? And we look at all the risk pathways of how these diseases come into farm, we control what we can control, and we put a health plan in place. And like I say, I've been a vet for 20 years, and until 5 years ago, I didn't think about TB like I did other infectious diseases. And we need to, because it has risk pathways. There are things we can control, and we can reduce our risk of getting it and eliminate it quicker from farms. So thinking of TB, it's very, very similar to Johne's. It's the same similar family of bacteria. It's quite hard to identify, and it's quite hard to eradicate it, but it shouldn't stop us trying. So in order to understand and identify these risks, I'm just going to go through some of the important things and some take-home messages from today. So understanding the tests we use is really important. So their benefits, but their limitations. Understanding the characteristics of the bacteria and why that makes it a little bit harder to eradicate. Looking at cattle to cattle spread and badger to cattle spread and vice versa, and what we can do, what is within our power to control. So the skin test. The skin test gets a lot of bad press, and often it's for the wrong reasons. I think with COVID and everything in the news at the moment, we sort of hear these words specificity and sensitivity for tests, and some people understand them. My very simple explanation for specificity of a scientific test is the probability that we correctly identify infected people or animals. So the specificity for the skin test is 99.9798%. So that means when we get a reactor on the skin test, we are 99.97% certain that that animal is truly carrying TB. And this is really important because we cull TB reactors. So we need to be certain that those animals are truly infected. And I think sometimes farmers see the skin test the other way round. They don't trust when they get a reactor on the skin test, but when we get a pre-movement test, they do trust that those animals definitely don't have disease. The majority of our reactors that go don't have lesions at slaughter. And this is because we have this routine skin testing. So we're taking these animals out before they get to the clinical signs of disease. And actually, no visible lesions, when you get that back on your post-mortem chart, I think that's good news, because that means that those animals aren't as infectious to the rest of the herd as they could be. And if you say no visible lesions to yourself, they're not saying that there weren't lesions, they just weren't visible at that post-mortem. And the post-mortem that those cows go through is, albeit slowed down, a commercial meat line. The lungs are felt and then they're cut into. So if you've got a lesion the size of an apple, it's more likely to be found than if you've got a lesion the size of a pea. So no visible lesions is good news, but a reactor on the skin test has got TB. And you're all dairy farmers on the call. Think of your subclinical and clinical mastitis. We get your milk, you get the test results back that shows you've got cell count. We manage that disease because we know if we don't manage it, it will progress into clinical mastitis, and worse, that animal can be spreading those bacteria to the rest of the herd. So we do something about it. And that's exactly what we do with no visible lesion TB reactors. They need to exit the herd. So a skin test reactor is a reactor. So that's the good side of the TB skin test. The downside of the skin test and its limitation is its sensitivity. And the sensitivity is the probability of correctly identifying every truly infected animal. And the sensitivity of the skin test, on a good day, if the test is done correctly, if the animals behave and you can get your jabs in where you need to go, the sensitivity is about 80%. So that means 20% of animals that should test positive actually test negative. So 1 in 5 reactors are missed. So this is why you're put under movement restrictions, because we know if you get 1 reactor, there will be others within the herd. And this is why you have to complete your 60-day testing. And this is why you have to have 2 consecutive tests. So we are pretty certain we haven't left any disease behind. But we know that a lot of herds do break down again within 6 months, within 18 months, and that could be because of this poor sensitivity of the skin test. This has got massive implications when you're buying stock in, because the longer a herd has been free of TB, the more you can trust that test is truly clear. So my rule of thumb is, if you are buying in, buy from a lower risk herd than yourself. So if you've been TB free for 2 to 3 years, buy from a herd that's been TB free from 3 years. If you've never had TB, then try and, go. My rule of thumb is 5 years TB free, and the risk of buying in TB is a lot lower. We do have ways of increasing that sensitivity. So we have severe interpretation. So if you look at the little graph on the right hand side, the white and blue lines are these inconclusives. Because the TB test is a subjective measurement, so a human measures it, there could be some grey areas. So that's why you have these inconclusives, so they get a second chance to be tested. Well, the blue inconclusives on severe interpretation, they don't get that second chance. They get taken as reactors, so we are less likely to leave animals behind. The other test we have, which is routinely used where we know we've got lesioned animals, so we know we've got clinical disease on that farm, is the gamma blood test. So the sensitivity of the gamma test is about 90%, so it's still not perfect, so you still can leave reactors behind. It misses 1 in 10, but if we do the skin test and the gamma test at the same time, hopefully they don't miss the same ones. But you can get a skin test positive and a gamma test negative. You can get a gamma test positive and a skin test negative. It just means they're missing some of them. Hopefully you get them both positive, and that sort of says to your mind, yeah, these animals need to go. But again, the majority of gamma blood positives can be NVL, because the gamma test picks up TB reactors slightly earlier in the disease as well. So that's another advantage of the gamma test. The gamma gets a bit of negative press because its specificity, so the probability of truly identifying infected animals, is a bit less. It's about 96, 97%. So this means you can get more false positives, but that's why we don't use gamma as a screening test. We use it only when we know we've got disease, clinical disease in those reactors with lesions. So I hope that kind of just dispels a few sort of myths around the skin test and the gamma test, but also helps you manage that risk around buying in.
Hi Sarah, don't mind me cutting in there, but I did just have a quick question that someone's posed about the sensitivity, and it's from Phil, and it's asking, does that mean 20% false negatives from the same? So just going back to your previous slide, when you're saying 1 in 5, Phil's asking the question about sensitivity, does that mean 20% false negatives? I didn't know if you just wanted to run through that.
Yes, so animals are testing negative when they should be testing positive. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. On to the next slide. So I hope that, to me, understanding that skin test and its limitations can really help you manage when you're buying cattle in, which is one of the biggest ways of introducing TB into your farm. The other thing I'd like to talk about is actually the bacteria itself and why it is quite tricky to get rid of it. But again, how we can understand some of the risk pathways. So TB is Mycobacterium bovis. Human TB is Mycobacterium tuberculosis, so it is different. The majority of human TB used to be Mycobacterium bovis. We have had a very successful vaccination program, the pasteurization of milk, and actually, so human TB tends to now be human TB. The TB bacteria has a waxy shell, which means it can survive really well in the environment, but also in our immune system. So that's one of the reasons we don't get TB lesions very quickly. So it tends to be those older cattle that show bigger lesions, because actually it hides, it's our immune system that causes those big pussy tubercles in the lungs, and the TB bacteria hides, so that just doesn't happen. And that's really clever, because actually if you kill your host really quickly, you don't get a chance to spread into the rest of the population. It spreads from animal to animal via close contact, but more importantly, I think from cattle and a badger point of view, from contaminated feed and pasture. And we know it can survive for months in this environment. And my kind of big sort of wow fact I like to tell farmers when we've walked through a field, we've seen a badger run going straight to their water trough, is that it can live for up to 60 days in water. So if you've got an infected badger sharing your water troughs, you've got a potential source of infection that can sit there for quite a while. That is something we can manage. Maybe you can't eliminate it because you have to have low water troughs because you've got little Dexters. I've got a farmer that can't, he's raised his troughs as high as he can, but he can't go up to a metre. You can empty them more regularly. And when in the summer, on hot sunny days, if you're not using that paddock, empty that water out of that trough so you break the habit of the badger being able to come to it. We all know the badger population has trebled, if not quadrupled, over the last 20 years. Part of that is because farmers, us, have given them mineral licks, clean water to drink, and high starchy food to eat. So if we can actually stop them having access to these things, then hopefully when we have reduced the density of badgers in the cull areas and gone through all that hard work and effort, we can prevent that badger population rising again if we actually don't supplement their feed. It can live for up to 3 months in soil. And the other big thing for dairy farms is up to 6 months in stored slurry. Slurry, again, isn't as big as risk as kind of I think it's been portrayed. You have to have a TB in your herd for slurry to be an issue. And I think you have to have a lot of TB in your herd for slurry to be an issue. You think if you're with your Johne's positives, how many of them actually test positive on their feces? It's intermittently shed. And if we store it for 6 months, spread it on sunny days, the UV and warmth does kill it off. But if you're a closed herd, you don't have infected badgers, you don't have cattle to cattle contact, this could be the tiny risk pathway that TB does come onto your farm. So this comes nicely into the cattle to cattle spread. Have you already got TB on your farm and it is spreading within the herd? And there's ways of trying to manage that. So on some of my farms, I look at the ovine only reactors and we manage those as if they're sort of Johne's positive cows. So they would leave the herd potentially at the end of lactation. We'd serve them to beef, we wouldn't serve them to black and white. So we're not perpetuating that issue within the herd. Is it particular cohorts within the herd that a group of heifers that actually are going at different, seemingly it's different ages of cattle that are going every year, but they all were a particular cohort of heifers? Can you manage those differently? One breakdown, it's a vet friend of mine who's a dairy farmer. They had TB, quite a nasty TB breakdown in their young calves with quite large lesions. And it turns out that they were using the water out of the dry cow troughs to fill up their calf buckets. And it was the dry cow that had TB, and then that spread to all their calves. So it's just thinking of all those potential risk pathways and trying to reduce them, if not eliminate them. A big risk factor is your neighbours. Do they have TB? Are they purchasing risky cattle? And again, I get a lot of farmers saying, well, I'm doing everything I can, but my neighbour up the road always is off to market, going and buying any cattle he likes, and they're putting my cattle at risk. Again, we can manage that. You can have a 3 metre gap. It doesn't have to be perfect fences. Round here in Derbyshire, we've just got big hedges that stop that nose-to-nose contact. And it is your herd you're trying to protect. So yes, it might be their fence. You might lose a couple of metres into your own paddock, but is that worth doing to prevent a TB breakdown? And actually things like that have got you're more likely to get IBR and BVD if you don't have that gap from your neighbours than you probably are TB. And if you're buying in, do you ask what the TB history of the farm they're coming from? I think we're very good now at asking if Johne's risk, BVD risk, but we don't necessarily ask about the TB history. I would like to show you very quickly, oops, sorry, wrong way. A website called IBTB, which I hope, I've been telling everybody about IBTB for the last 5 years, so I hope everybody has seen this. It's very much like Google Maps. You can zoom in, zoom out, and it shows every breakdown herd going back 10 years now in England and Wales. So you can immediately see these are ongoing breakdowns. So these are herds that are shut down right now in, my geography is awful, Norfolk, Suffolk. There is one breakdown, whereas if you go down into sort of the Devon area, you know, you get into the hundreds, and actually into Staffordshire and Derbyshire, where I am, we're in the hundreds as well. And this is a really good map of just showing you that stratification of the country. If you go on to, so these are, I think I flicked on too far, bear with me. So this is zoomed in. If you search by postcode or CPH, so if you're going to a catalogue sale or you're going to a catalogue market, if you can look up those batches of animals that you are interested in and have a look at their TB history. So this is my practice, the postcode, so it comes up as a little circle. So we haven't had a TB, we're not under TB restrictions. If you change this arrow here to all types, that takes us back 10 years. So that immediately makes that situation look worse because it's got 10 years worth of TB breakdowns on it. And if you click on one of those blue dots, it will tell you when that herd was shut down and then when it was opened up again. So it will tell you the length of those breakdowns. And I think, again, I can't tell people, you know, what is the rule to buy in and what isn't. It's all to do with the risk you're prepared to take for your business. And like I said, if you've had TB in the last year, you might be more concerned about Johne's and BVD and not buying that back in. Whereas if you've never had TB or you haven't had TB for 5 years, I think finding out this information is pretty fundamental to keeping TB out. So I am going to talk about the role of badgers because badgers do spread TB. We are allowed to say that. There is science and evidence that shows that badgers give TB to cattle and cattle give TB to badgers. So even if you're in the low risk area where we don't believe badgers are infected, we know that cattle are coming into the area with TB. These sort of biosecurity things are as important for you guys, so we don't infect the badger population. Because when it does get into the badger population, it makes controlling TB really difficult. And the biggest way they give TB to cattle is through contaminated feed and water. They do share our pasture, and we probably can't do a lot about that. And my motto is control the controllable. So acknowledging what you can't control is a big step forward, and managing gaps they can get through. So they can get through gaps of 7.5 centimetres, like I said. I go on a lot of farms where they've got feed stores with amazing roller shutter doors, very expensive roller shutter doors, and you can tell they've never been shut because they just don't work. There's that much crud in the runners, or they come down so far like this one does, and badgers are getting in. If you don't know what badger activity you've got, the easiest way is to put a wildlife camera up and actually have a look. And if you need an incentive to spend a little bit of money putting sheeted gates, blocking gaps and things like that, often that can do that for you. And the big thing with badgers is they're quite habitual, they're quite lazy. So if they can get into your farmyard for an easy, good feed, they will. If you can break that habit, they will go elsewhere. So all these badger proof measures only need to really be up at night. It's very rare that, and I know people on this call probably will say they've seen badgers around in the daytime, but the majority of this activity is at night. So it might be that you just need to have sheeted gates shut at night, electric fencing up at night. So the last thing you do before you go to bed, go round and shut all those gates, shut all the feed store doors, and you know, keep the badgers away from your food. Let's move on. It's getting slower, I think. This is directly taken from the TB Hub, and it's a great guy who Di and I both know, called Andy Robertson, who's done the interactive map. And it just, I think it's fun, and it's colourful, and it's kind of like a cartoon, but actually it just helps you think about all the possible risks on your farm. And actually it's a good way, I think, just to sit down as a team and think what you can control and what you can do for all these different risks. If you go onto the website, each of these red dots tells you about the risk and actually what you can do to reduce it. So it is a really, really good exercise to go through as a team, to look at what you could do on your farm to eliminate TB. For some reason, it's not clicking on until I do that. Oh, I don't know what's happened.
While you have a play, Sarah,
can someone else move? I think it's my internet that's letting me down. I do apologise. I'll keep talking anyway, see if it catches up with me. Can everyone still hear me? Yeah, good. Yeah, I think it's my internet. I do apologise. So, oh, here we go. So what I tell all my farmers, and if you're in a cull area and you've done any set surveying, you will get to know your badgers. If you think it's too obvious to be a badger run, then it is a badger run. Badger runs are these really distinctive lines going through things, and they tend to be heading for something quite high on the horizon because they're low to the ground and quite short-sighted. Badger paw prints, getting to know the difference between a badger and a dog. So badgers have a very kidney-shaped pad, and you see all 5 toes on the footprint. Badger sets are a D on its side, so tend to be low and wide, looking to see when they're active at different times of the year, because again, if you do have quite active sets in a particular pasture at a particular time of year, even just very simple way of managing it is putting your finishing animals in that field, or your cull cows, rather than your in-calf heifers. It's not going to eliminate the risk, but it will reduce the risk of infecting those in-calf heifers. Badger latrines tend to be little holes that are dug, and then the badgers will poo on them. They tend to be bilinear features, so hedges, fence lines, where 2 sort of boundaries meet. They can be anything from cowpat-like, if they're eating a lot of earthworms, to very firm dog poo-like with maize kernels or grain in. So again, that can tell you what they're eating, probably getting into your coarse calf. Badger hair is quite easy to identify, again, because it's not round, it's oval, so it doesn't run through your fingers. So again, these are just little sort of tips that help you get to know the badger activity on your farm and manage it, really, and manage that risk. Are we going to move on? Maybe not. Lots of things you can do. The simplest way to badger-proof fence is to run electric, and it only has to be about 30 centimetres off the ground. We can step over it, you can still work machinery over it, so it can go round feed faces on the side of sheds, or clamped maize and whole crop silage. They love that because it's really high starch. So there is lots of simple things you can do. My internet's just died now, so I apologise. I'll just keep talking. Mineral licks are a big draw for badgers, so if you are using mineral licks, make sure they are 1 metre off the ground. I see quite a lot of people that raise them off the ground but put them on a 5-bar gate, or the badgers can climb the gate. Good idea, but just thinking about how the badger's going to get into there. See if it'll work. And managing water, so raising those water troughs off the ground up to 1 metre. But thinking of your, oh, here we go. So sheeting gate, so this is corn into a shed, but there was a gap under the gate, so they've put this rubber on the bottom of it. It was quite soft, so they've added a bar so the badgers can't push it. If I was being overly critical, I'd want the sheets to be on the outside, because in theory a badger maybe could climb that. And also I'd clear up this spillage, because a badger will still want to come into this yard to eat that, if nothing else. So clean and tidy, shovel and a broom, if nothing else. This was a mineral lick that was down on the floor, so the easy solution for the guy was to put it up into the actual feed trough, and not feeding animals on the ground. We know that badgers and cattle don't often share pasture at the same time, but badgers will come in if there's residue of starchy food on the floor. Right, so this is kind of how long have I got? Often farmers feel that TB, you know, there isn't a lot they can do about controlling TB on the farm. We can control lots of little factors, and I'd like to think they all would contribute to a lower risk, but quite often, unfortunately, history and geography does go against us, and it does feel a bit like potluck. So what I've started doing with some of my farmers is actually planning for the worst. So a lot of farmers say there's a lot of stress and anxiety around the anticipation of the TB test, those 3 days that you have to wait to be read. So make a plan. And this is, you know, work out what part of your business would be affected by those TB restrictions and what you can do to limit that impact, whether that's short term, medium term and long term. You do a cash flow forecast. Okay, do a cash flow forecast to see what would happen if you couldn't sell those stores, if you couldn't buy in more dairy cows to increase your production, if you had to keep all your baby calves on farm because you would normally get rid of them. Look at what impacts this would have, and maybe rather than keep all those calves, it would be better to take a price hit and sell them into an AFU. Nobody likes selling stock for less than it's worth, but actually if your breakdown starts in September and you've got to keep those animals over winter, we all know what the price of straw is like at the minute. Actually, you know, sell those animals on at a lower cost, but make a plan and include this in your sort of long-term business plan. We hope it won't happen, but actually think about it. If you're thinking of putting a new shed up, could it be badger proofed? Could it be made suitable to become an isolation unit or an AFU if you needed to? Some of the biggest, most heartbreaking calls I've had to take through the TB advisory service is where people are heifer rearing away from home, and it's on a different holding, and people are quite aware that you can't sell animals off your holding. What people aren't aware of is actually you can't bring animals onto your holding at least till you've completed your first short interval test, but actually it's only if APHA agree to license that move, and more they are not licensing those moves. And I had an awful story of a lady who was told by APHA she just had to shoot her in-calf heifers because there was no option for them. There's no market really for them. She had no calving facilities and no calf rearing facilities and no milking facilities. So if you are rearing heifers away from home, think about what impact that would have. Could you bring them back earlier? Or could you link those holdings, which are some of the things I'm going to talk about? Is it your reputation? You know, do you sell pedigree stock, breeding stock? Checks the cattle health scheme that accredit Lepto, BVD, IBR also do a TB scheme. So is it worth you investing in that? It's not a huge amount of money. There's very little extra testing. And actually that could just reassure people that you are doing everything you can to reduce TB risk. Selling store cattle, quite a few of my farmers use their 6 monthly test as a pre-movement test to sell stores on. All of a sudden you can't sell those 40 stores. That's obviously a big hit on cash, and also you've got those mouths to feed. Baby calves under 42 days. A lot of my dairy farmers only keep heifer calves. Everything else leaves under 6 weeks. You know, what would you do if you couldn't get rid of those? Flying herd, I've talked about buying in restrictions. Milk contracts, they're bringing in new rules now all the time, if not already, about non-euthanasia of dairy bred calves. And some people are using that as a welfare option, if I'm honest. And also penalties in your contract for under and overproduction. If you suddenly lose half a dozen cows at peak lactation, you're underproduction, you have a group of heifers that calve down, you'd normally sell half of them and they all join the herd, you're overproduction. Just looking at things like that. And if you are rearing cattle, you can't buy on for a certain period, you know, that stops your throughput and your cash flow at the other end. So just knowing what would happen if you went down with TB, and nobody likes to think about it, but you know, do plan for the worst. Now it's clicked on too far. So, but there are options. They're not suitable for everybody. Looking up different things that you can do. So look up where local approved finishing units are. If they are on the IBTB map as little purple squares, it could be that it's a finishing unit up the road and you just didn't realise they were an AFU. Finding out, okay, my TB test is in a month's time. Would they have space? What age of cattle do they take? What price do they pay? So this can all form part of your plan. And red and orange markets, if you're not normally a market goer, you know, what days of the week are they on? Ring the auctioneers. Do they have many buyers? Just make it less of a shock when you get that breakdown. And then these options of isolation units, temporary land associations, temporary CPHs, are they something? All these you have to do before you have a breakdown. They will not license them if you need them when you have a breakdown, so you have to think about them. If you are needing to replace cattle, please talk to your vet about the other diseases. I've seen a really bad Johne's breakdown after buying in cattle, normally was a closed herd but needed to buy replacements. Can you breed more dairy heifers or more calves that are suitable for the local rearing units that you've got? Not great for national disease control, but for your own business, could you destock before the test? So sell off, do a pre-movement test of all those extra mouths to feed before you do your main herd test, because it does tend to be adult cattle that do tend to have the lesions and shut you down. And then the checks TB, like I spoke about. So approved finishing units, they are in the high risk and edge area. They can have grazing, but at the moment, if you've been in a culling area for 2 years, they won't allow you to graze, which makes sense because we don't want to reinfect the badgers. If you're grazing, you do have to do 90-day surveillance testing. But if you're not a grazing AFU, there is no TB surveillance testing. So there's no tracer testing, there's no post-movement testing, there's no annual herd testing to do. So for some people that are finishing animals, that is a massive advantage. You also don't have to pre-movement test to enter. So that's something to bear in mind if you are keeping calves now to 8 weeks and you do want to get them off farm, but you're worried about that pre-movement test that you'll have to do now they're over 6 weeks, they can go into an AFU without a pre-movement test. They can also take animals from herds that aren't shut down with TB. So, and quite a few AFUs, they only do it to protect their own business rather than actually take TB restricted cattle. So there's more about than you think. So yeah, just do a little bit of research as to where they are and what capacity they've got. Isolation units are very different. So they can be a separate business, but they are only single source units. And I think the most useful they could be is for a block calving dairy herd that would normally get rid of all their non-female dairy calves. If the main herd is shut down, the isolation units kind of get switched on, and it's basically a cattle-proof, badger-proof building. You've got 6 weeks to fill it, and then it's closed. And if that unit then passes 2 consecutive 60-day tests, that unit can sell those animals on as clear tested, irrespective of what's happening on the main herd. Obviously, when you're buying in, they are potentially risky cattle, but they are actually identified on the passport. So you should be able to if people are finishing cattle, to know whether they've come from isolation units. So this is definitely something for people to look into. It's not for everybody, and it isn't a perfect solution, but this is definitely something, you know, if you do have somebody that is rearing your calves for you, could they become an isolation unit? And when you go down with TB, they can still carry on taking your calves. Temporary land associations, so these are like the old-fashioned linked holdings, sole occupancy authorities that we used to have. They do have to be within 10 miles. They are classed as one epidemiological unit. So if one unit is shut down, they are both shut down. So if you're rearing heifers away from home and they are within 10 miles, this could be the option for you. You don't have to pre-movement test between the units, so that's a massive advantage. Almost the opposite of that is the temporary holding number. So if you do have one unit, but you're split over 2 sites, could you split those and become separate CPHs? You would have to pre-movement test between the units. You'd have to show quite good biosecurity between them, so you weren't weren't carrying muck and using the same dirty equipment. But if one unit is shut down, the other one can remain open. So the way the temporary land association is better for animals that ultimately want to come back to the main herd. A temporary CPH is probably for those animals that ultimately leave the farm. So they've both got pros and cons. They've both got advantages and disadvantages for the business. So it's sitting down and thinking which would work better for me, but you have to apply for them before you shut down with TB. So you'll be pleased now I'm nearly done. So my kind of summary is TB costs a lot of money for business, for the government, for everybody. England does have the highest level of bovine TB in Europe for lots of different reasons. The annual cost to taxpayers, which we are, is £100 million every year. That's another reason the government does want to get rid of TB. The average cost of a breakdown is about £30,000. 2/3 of that is farm costs. And more importantly to me, in 2020, 27,000 cattle were slaughtered due to bovine TB. These are otherwise fit and healthy cattle that could be adding to our productive national herd, and they're not. We're all talking about efficiencies and green air strategies and things like that. To me, it's all about productivity and efficiencies. Well, this is a major inefficiency to me, and we need to address this as an industry. But from a personal note, I've seen farm businesses destroyed. I've seen whole herd genetics go. The mental and physical health impact on people, you can't even begin to describe it. And you guys will know probably better than me. You know, your farms are your homes. They're not just your jobs. And, you know, to lose that, to be the generation that loses the farm is massive. And yeah, I've seen families and lives destroyed through TB. So we have to, as an industry, you know, acknowledge that government on its own isn't going to get rid of this disease. This testing and culling of cattle doesn't work. We need to do all the other little bits as well. We need to acknowledge risk-based trading. We need to acknowledge biosecurity on farm. We can control the controllable. I know we can't control all the risks, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't control what we can. And that, you'll be pleased to know, is me finished.
Sarah, thank you for that. You've covered such a wide area, and I've absolutely no doubt that you knew it was going to raise a lot of questions. So first of all, for all our listeners, if you do want to receive the slides, I think the best thing to do is probably email into the ROBDF. So quick note then for the email address is office@robdf.co.uk, and we will forward the slides back out to you. I think as well, you mentioned in your talk, Sarah, about Andy Robertson on the leaflet that you put up. I know he's done a lot of leaflets specifically about slurry, etc., very detailed, and they're really interesting, aren't they?
Yeah, that's his website there.
Yes, brilliant. So if everybody's looking on here,
take a photo with your camera and on your phone. That's how I do it quickly, and then yeah.
And they're certainly worth a look, aren't they? Those
definitely.
help sheets that he's done. So. Yeah. Couple of quick technical questions, and we'll probably have to go do quick fire questions and answers, Sarah, because I've got so many. Yeah. Can TB pass in colostrum or across the placenta? And this has come from Kate.
The colostrum, yes, but normally a cow would have to have quite extensive and udder lesions for that to happen. Placenta, we don't really know, but we do know that Johne's does. So, and they are similar. So just putting that out there. I wouldn't rule it out.
So that leads me very nicely, Sarah, into what is the link between Johne's and TB then?
So people, I've just had this conversation with someone this morning. The jury's a little bit out. Some people would think that if you've got Johne's positive animals, you will get falsely positive testing TB cattle. Others think actually it will suppress the immune response, so you'll get more false negative TB testing cattle. So the honest answer is the science is a bit conflicting. My practical measures are, if you are routinely Johne's testing and then all of a sudden you get a TB breakdown, it's looking at your test results in context. So it's all about not taking individual test results, but actually looking at the rising plane with Johne's. So you might get a blip from having the TB test, but actually it's still looking at that history. From a TB point of view, if, God forbid, we took out a falsely testing positive TB reactor because of Johne's, is that the end of the world? Because that Johne's cow potentially would need to go anyway. And actually our TB policy is eradication. So we do know that if we take out a false, we'd rather take out false positives than leave disease behind. That makes sense.
So Brian and Caroline have just posed a question about the stats at the start, Sarah, and we can see some really good decreases. And I think when you actually go into the detail of counties like Devon, which I'm very obviously more knowledgeable about, those results are coming down quite quickly. But the question they're posing is, how much is the annual increase pre this strategy of the last 5 years? Do you have anything there? How does it compare really?
So so it was steadily increasing. I mean, right back in the 70s, we'd got down to 2 spots in Gloucestershire and Somerset that still had TB. And obviously gradually it has spread out and out through TB testing, through badgers, through growing maize, more intensification of farming, whatever reasons, or everything adds up. And it was gradually rising. And from my own experience in Derbyshire, we were on 4 yearly testing where you only had to do adults 20 years ago. And we have changed now that we're on 6 monthly TB testing. So I've seen it go from the level of low risk area right up to the level of high risk area. TB started to plateau around 2011. So going back a little bit further, sorry, it did start to rise when the badgers were put on the protected species and we stopped doing the ring culling that was happening. So that was sort of late 80s, early 90s. So it started to rise a little bit. The biggest jump was that 2001, which was the year I graduated, because we suspended TB testing for nearly 2 years. So if you don't look for disease, it carries on. And just that 2 years of not testing and not taking out those reactors, yes, a little bit of restocking as well, so herds, cattle were moved about. That's when we saw a massive jump in 2001, and then it's steadily risen up until about 2011 when it did start to plateau. So to me, that was our testing regime holding disease at bay. It's only till we've had that strong badger culling policy, which is what I do believe is having the biggest impact in the southwest. That is my personal opinion. And in Derbyshire and the edge counties, we have had 6 monthly testing of cattle. So I think that's what's helping our little dip. So hopefully, if in the southwest, this might not go down very well, but if you start doing 6 monthly cattle testing, better use of gamma, and you've been culling badgers, we should see the dip start to accelerate. Hold me to
that. From Mark Yearsley then, research genetics into cattle that have got sort of a higher resistance to TB. How's that going? Do you have any views?
Yeah, so Mike Kofi is Edinburgh. So normally if I tweet something about TB, he reminds everybody about the TB advantage, which most bulls now, you'll know better than me, have this score. I don't believe, and someone could correct me, that there's ever been one that's been found that's had a negative score. So that's a good thing. I think they've mainly done it for black and white. They are going to look at beef bulls and other dairy breeds as well. My concern was, are you breeding for cows that are more resistant to the skin test? Are you breeding? It's just because they pick bulls that have been used widely in the low risk area, so they're not going to get TB. But he assures me that that risk has been eliminated, and this is definite genetic advantage for those animals. Again, that's going to be quite a slow change, but it will help, keep TB and bank the benefits of all the hard cattle testing and culling that we're doing. So yeah, and from the on the side of looking at investigating breakdowns, we have whole genome sequencing now instead of the Spoligotype. The Spoligotype was quite a blunt tool. It was the best we had. It at best gave you the regional accent of where you should expect to find that TB. So if you found a Derbyshire accent in Devon, you would know that that was a purchase rather than a home range. Whereas now they're doing whole genome sequencing, so they can almost identify and tell the story. So it's gone from a cattle into the badger population to another badger and back into the cattle population. So that's giving a lot more evidence as to how TB is getting onto farm. But you have to have lesioned animals for that to be able to get the genetic material.
So I think we've got time for, I've got about 5 questions, Sarah, probably
okay.
only 5
okay.
a few minutes. Really good question from Julia here about your thoughts on cattle vaccination and where it's going and how impactful that will be.
So it's another imperfect tool in a toolbox full of imperfect tools. It can't be used on its own. It won't be a silver bullet. It's got to be used with good testing, better testing, badger culling, reducing the impact from wildlife. At best, the vaccine causes a third of cattle to get good immunity, a third get okay immunity, and a third don't get any. So it, like I say, it isn't like VBD vaccination. We're pretty sure that every animal gets really good cover. So it's not perfect. And the big key thing is that every vaccinated animal at the moment would test positive to the skin test, which is why we have literally just gone live field trials into the DIVA test, which is differentiating infected versus vaccinated animals. It's like your IBR marker vaccine. It would tell us which animals are truly infected and which ones have been vaccinated. My big take-home message for RABDF is that at the moment we're not allowed to trade TB vaccinated cattle. So there's got to be a few changes in law, a few negotiations, but it's got to be a positive thing, because if we reduce that R number even by a third, then we'll reduce TB.
We all know about R numbers now.
We do.
On a practical level then, is there a bacterial inoculant treatment for sanitizing drinking water, for example? Someone mentioned the company Pruex, and also other diagnostics, that are being developed alongside genetics, etc.
So there's people on this call who I've seen who can answer the question about water treatment and things like that. So there are things available. And I must admit, since last Dairy Tech, it's been on my agenda to go and find out more. So I will do that. From the different tests, we've always had well, not always, but we've got antibody tests. So the test we use in the skin is looking for a change in the immune system, whereas a lot of tests we use on farm are actually antibody tests to see when a different part of the immune system. And in TB, we always thought antibodies rose quite late in the disease, so they weren't very useful for that early detection. But for herds that have had TB quite a lot, for those herds that are still getting slaughterhouse cases that are testing negative skin test, we can go in with antibody tests. So there's the IDEX and the Enfaplex. The people that have developed Enfaplex say that actually antibodies rise earlier, and it's something we should be using more widely. My only caveat is that they are more sensitive tests, so we would lose more animals. So be careful kind of what you wish for. And it's like everything, it's understanding the test, understanding that impact it would have on your herd. But in the consultation or the call for views net that's out now, it is asking for views on the voluntary use of farmers and vets to use these tests on farm. But at the moment, you wouldn't get compensation for those reactors, and you wouldn't be taken off movement restrictions until all those test positive animals have gone. So it sounds great, and from a veterinary point of view, I'd love to go in and use more of those tests, but there are consequences that might impact your business. So pros and cons again, but if you can understand them and you know about them, then that's half the story, isn't it?
A quick technical question then, Sarah. Is there a predictable incubation period between an animal being infected and detectable lesions. This is from Phil Christopher.
Thanks, Phil.
And
I will mention the cheese a day challenge for February. So the minimum incubation period we think is 60 days, which is why the breakdown testing is done on 60 days, and you can't retest an animal before 60 days. The incubation period other than that is how long's a piece of string. We know the poor sensitivity of the test, so we're missing animals. We know that the TB bacteria can hide from the immune system, so they won't test positive. So when we test positive, we assume that's been the kind of incubation period between it getting it and testing positive. The animal could have tested positive 3 years before, or been positive but missed the test, but still be infectious. And that's the hard thing with TB. You might have your first TB breakdown now, but the disease has been bubbling away for a few years before. So no is the answer to this question.
Sarah, that's a whole hour you've been speaking for. That's perfect. You've been an absolute star. I hope people have had so much information that they can really take away and start thinking about different approaches, how they can minimize risk on their farm, and they will be bespoke to their own farms, won't they? It'll be very interesting to have a look at that. So we're going to move on now. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you, TB Advisory Service. You've been a star, and I'm going to hand over to Kath Applin at Boehringer, who's going to start talking about calves.